How can anyone, whether they want to work in a language school or privately from their own laptop anywhere in the world, create a rewarding and impactful career teaching English as a second language, even if they are just starting out or have no teaching experience or ability? Hi, my name is Lynette Kim, and here on the TESOL Talk podcast, I aim to answer that very question.
I've spoken with people before that would really have loved to be an ESL teacher, teach English as a second language. They felt like it would be so rewarding, great way to earn a living. It would make them feel that they were doing something that was important, and really enjoy the contact with that. But they were scared. They were really nervous about doing it. And one of the major fears that people have when thinking about standing up or taking control of a lesson or holding space in a classroom is the fear that they can't control everything that goes on. Classroom management, that this is a big issue. It's like, okay, I've got to make sure that these students behave. If they're children, how am I going to get them to do what I want them to do? How am I going to get them to follow my instructions? It's bad enough that they don't understand English properly, but on top of that, they're kids. So, I've got to control the behavior of a group of if you're doing study tour, up to 30 children or more sometimes. If you're teaching ESL classes, usually it goes up to 18. So how on earth am I going to control that? And if you're teaching adults, it's similar. So you're going to stand up there. Sometimes the adults can be older than you as the teacher, depending on your age. And how are you going to get these people to sit there and listen to you and not look at you and roll their eyes and go, oh, what am I getting for my money? So these people are thinking, they've told me I would love to do it, but I'm scared. I just don't feel like I can control that. Well, there's the issue right there and then, control. Teaching ESL isn't about control. It's anything but. So in order to effectively do classroom management or teach, you need to be flexible. You need to be able to adapt on the fly, improvise. You need to let go in order for it all to come together. And I have a really good experience with this. And this was many years ago on the Gold Coast. There was a Japanese study tour. And so this was a group of teenage students. And they were averaged in age from about 14 to 16. So you can imagine that's getting to a bit of a tough crowd. Now, what had happened is, they'd already spent a day with an Australian teacher, ESL teacher, and the poor thing had been tortured by these students. And so the teacher walked out and said, I can't do this anymore. And of course, the Japanese agents wanted to replace the teacher anyway because they saw it wasn't going well and were worried about what would happen. So I was called and asked to replace. Sometimes in difficult situations, study tours will call in more experienced teachers because they feel that, they got more chance of something that's gone wrong getting fixed. So, but here's where the problem came in. They told me the students were very young, which they weren't. So I was imagining like 8 to 12-year-olds. They told me the students were elementary level, which they weren't. They were at least intermediate level. So I rock up at the classroom the next day, ready to teach. Oh, and they told me all the resources I would ever need would be in a box in the classroom for me to use. So I turn up the next day and I get there early and there's the box of resources. And to be honest, they were so mediocre at best. And I'm like, oh my goodness, they're so flat. Not that I can't play with them and adapt them, but they just weren't things that I would normally use. Luckily for me, I already have my own study tour resources and my own study tour program. So I'd brought my things along and I'd already said, I'll probably use my own things. And they're like, okay, if you need to. So anyway, I went into the classroom and the students all started turning up and I saw the age of these guys. Now, I'd come into the classroom with my things prepared for 8 to 10, 12-year-olds at best. And there were these teenagers, some of them taller than me. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So the students all file in, they're looking at me, and they sit in all their chairs. And I had actually gotten out, because I thought they were young, a couple of puppets. So I had like a kangaroo puppet and a koala puppet. And there's me at the front of the class with these teenagers with these puppets on my hands. So the class was kind of looking at me like, and I knew this could go one way or the other. It was like, a bit hairy. So anyway, I had put my name on the board and I introduced myself and I just held up the puppets. I mean, what are you going to do? And I'm like, this is a koala and this is a kangaroo. And they kind of smiled. And luckily, Asian students love cute things. And these were quite cute puppets. So they were like, ooh, and ahhing over the puppets, which is nice. And so I said to the students, asked them a few questions and did a little get to know you around the classroom with a hacky sack. So that's what I always take for young students. So I had this hacky sack. It's like a cloth small ball filled with like little beanie things so that it's not going to hurt anyone and probably shouldn't break any windows. So I'm tossing it around, just asking random questions to students who catch it, ascertaining their level. So within a few minutes, I realized, oh my goodness, these guys are at least intermediate level, so they're not elementary. So what I'd brought in wasn't really at their level, but I'll just have to adapt it. So here is where the being flexible and adapting comes in. So anyway, while I'm playing this game with the students, I'm sort of paying attention to them and intuitively just feeling out the classroom. And it became apparent really quickly within the first hour of being there that the class was being actually run by two teenage boys who sat together at the back of the classroom. So we had these two boys, the class was in a U shape, and they were the cool, trendy, oldest boys, and whatever they were laughing, saying, all the other kids sort of followed them. And I'm like, that's really interesting and that's very, very useful.
Hi, it's Lynn here. I hope you're enjoying this episode of TESOL Talks. I just want to let you know that if you're interested in teaching English as a second language, the best way to get started is by getting your TESOL certification. And I recommend a TESOL Australia course because, well, I wrote them. I put everything that I wish I had been taught when I was first teaching into the TESOL Australia courses, along with a lot of other information and training. If you have any questions or you need someone to help you figure out a plan to create a rewarding and impactful career teaching English as a second language, simply go to our website, tesolau.com. That's TESOLAU.com and fill in the inquiry form to get professional advice on your goals and exact situation. Now let's get straight back to the episode.
So I turned around and I gave the students an activity to do where they were working in pairs. And while they were working in pairs, is my favorite thing to do to give myself some breathing space. I started figuring out, right, I'm going to adapt my study tool material to make it a little bit more difficult, wrote up something on the board that was the start of a game. And then, when I got the class back again, I said to them, okay, so what we're going to do for this study tour, because it was going to go 5 days, I'm like, we're going to split the class into 2 teams. And each team is going to play against the other. And at the end of the week, the winning team, so that the end of the week was going to be the day before the study tour ended. So on the 4th day, the winning team would be announced. And on the 5th day, the losing team had to be the slaves of the winning team. Students love this sort of thing. It cracks them up a lot. So if they drop a piece of paper, the losing team person has to pick it up, this kind of stuff. It doesn't work with all classes, but in this particular instance, I knew that it would. The other thing, the winning team was also going to win a prize, and this prize was going to be a basket of goodies. Now, generally what students do is they'll share these anyway, so it doesn't matter. They won't miss out. So the winning team was going to get this basket, and I said I would bring bring it in the next day, which I did. I brought in like a basket with Tim Tams and lollies and, some souvenirs, the clip-on koalas and kangaroos and bits and pieces. I mean, students love this stuff. They take it home and give it as gifts for their families. So anyway, they knew there was a great prize. They knew that there was also the slave thing coming up. So this put tension into the class. So then what I did is I said, I'm going to pick heads for each of the teams. So the two team leaders, and they're going to pick the team. So then I picked each of those two boys that were the popular boys, and each had to be leader of a separate team. So this immediately pit them against each other. And so then that's splitting up that control of the classroom. So they come up to the front. They're quite impressed with themselves because they got to be the leaders, but that was the natural way to handle it and to have them on board. So from there, I let them pick the people that were going to be on their team. So they took turns, just like you do in a sports match with students at school. They picked their teams and the team was split. Then we split the classroom into two sections. So each team sat slightly apart from the other. And then we practiced games. So I had them doing backs to the board and Pictionary and a few other games to get them used to working as teams together to win games and get points. So for every game that they won, they got specific points. If a team, now, when it came time to hand out an activity, I would get the team leader to come to the front of the classroom and be the teacher and tell their team, this is what the activity was, this is what they had to do, and I'd explain to the team leader, and the team leader would explain to the class, and they would have to demonstrate as well. So they were like my little assistant teachers. And so they would tell their teams what to do. So then the teams would then all be responsible for each other to keep them in line. There was no bad behavior because the students were all trying to impress their team leader, and the team leader was definitely trying to win. So they were helping the people in their team and keeping everything flowing. So this meant that every time like a particular team finished an activity correctly first, they would get an X amount of points on the board. So each team, there was like a tally on the board. So then I had the students all like every activity, every worksheet and every game meant points. If students did something like if they misbehaved or did something wrong, which didn't happen often, they would lose points for the team. So the teams kept themselves in check. And for the 4 days, this just went on, and it was a hell of like so much fun. Like the students were doing this, they were managing the class, I was explaining the lessons and the vocab, had them doing lots of communicative activities. For every worksheet in a study tour, you must follow up with a game, worksheet activity, a game. It doesn't matter what, because the game incorporates practice of the vocabulary or the theme that they're learning. So it's not just some random game, it's a vocabulary-based game usually, but it just keeps that high energy going because it is a study tour. So these are students who are on school holidays, but here they are studying. So obviously, you want to keep that high energy for these guys. And if you can, a little bit physical too, have them up and about and doing things. So, I mean, this particular study tour went so well. I mean, we did debates. They were standing on their chairs, talking across the table at each other. And, they had such an amazing time. Now, I completely adapted everything that I was going to teach because it was the wrong level and it was the wrong age. And I had to do that on the fly. But it's doable. You just have to read your classroom carefully, look at the students' needs, and just, relax into it. What would you do in a normal circumstance? And being able to be adaptive is so important. So, and it can be done. And, that was one of the best study tours I've ever done. And it was just amazing. So other instances where this happens, when you're teaching adults and you're doing a course book and an activity is just flat. Some activities for particular classrooms, for whatever reason, just can't be saved. So if you're doing a lesson and there's an activity and it's so low energy and it's so flat and it's just basically torture, stop it. That's what I can say. Stop it, go on to the next activity, or add something, a little discussion or something interesting or something out of your bag of tricks, a warm-up activity or something. Throw that in the middle and then bring them on to the next activity. Don't flog a dead horse. If it's not working, and you can either adapt it, so just say that it's a reading activity or it's something where they're just looking at vocabulary, change it up and make it into a game. Still practicing the same things. Or if it's a writing activity and it's not going well, put them into pairs and get them writing it together and figuring out what they're going to write as a pair instead of doing it as individual students where there's no communication and it's very flat and low energy. Whatever it is, change it up and always be thinking in your mind, how can I make this better? How can I adapt this? And always be flexible. You don't have to stick rigidly to how activities are presented in ESL course books, as long as you're teaching what's in there and giving value to your students. And in fact, you are supposed to extend on what's there. What's there is your foundation. It's a guideline, but it's not rigid that you can't be adaptive of it. So learning to be flexible and adapting on the fly, whatever you need to do to put your students first and learning first in the classroom, that's what you need to practice doing. And don't be scared to do it because, as I said, so many people are scared of teaching because they think they need to control everything rigidly. But the teachers who do that are the ones that are the most stressed and burn out. So don't think, oh, I've got to control this classroom. I've got to manage this classroom. No, you're going to go in there and you've got to get to know your students and you've got to look at your material and think, how can I best present or adapt this so that it'll bring the most out of learning in the classroom and the most student talk time and communication. So anything you want that you need to adapt into pair or group work to make it more communicative, do it. Don't even hesitate. If something is going wrong and it's just not working, and for whatever reason, doesn't matter, dump it and go on to the next activity, or throw something like a mini warm-up or game activity in the middle just to bring up the energy of the class and then go on to the next activity. Don't flog a dead horse. Be adaptable, be flexible, move on, drop things that don't work in the ESL classroom.